Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
Well, we were just talking about hope that you're taking care of yourself. I know in this season, I can only imagine, I know as a pastor of a church, people are under a lot of trauma this past year, in addition to all the regular trauma that they have in their life. And when you're under that much grief and pain and trauma from all these other things that are going on in the world, you know, you don't always behave or respond in ways that are kind and gentle. And so I can imagine with you being in a public profile position. I know, for example, this week I had an email where a guy called me a charlatan, which I thought was, which I thought was a word that went out of vogue in the 19th century. But
he also called you a scallywag, too.
A scallywag? No, he didn't call me a scallywag. But when I would imagine, whenever you probably get a lot of good things too, but you know how the negative things, they eat at you a lot more. How do you process that in your life when?
You can't take everything very seriously. Some of those things. And if I told you some of the stuff that I've gotten. I got a rock in the mail, not like a little pebble, like I got a stone in a padded envelope. I've been told that I've empowered that I brought the powers of evil upon their church. And I thought, God, I didn't realize I was that powerful.
Hey, Voldemort. Would you step back a little from the church?
That I had invoked the powers of evil on their church. People say things, and sometimes I wonder, my gosh, you didn't just say it, you put it in writing, right? And it's like, and so you just have to just realize maybe they were just having a really bad day. My tendencies want to respond and send the stone back with more scripture, but that's just like, that wouldn't help anything or anybody. And a lot of things that I get is just, I am in receipt of your email dated March 23rd, 2021. Thank you for caring enough about the United Methodist Church that you would take the time to write. Because I think acknowledging what people are saying, that most people just want to be heard. I think that's the main part. But I think just not trying to take it personally. I do take it seriously because some of these are serious, and I learn a lot even from some of the wild things that I get is obviously either we're not communicating properly or people are misunderstanding or they don't know the whole story. I try to respond, but I try to temper that just with the fact that when everybody has a bad day and I don't have to respond to everything. That's the other thing is, I know this is going to be public, but there's some things that are so ugly and mean. It's like, you have to balance. Do they deserve a response? But you just have to temper all of that. But, here, I would say Louisiana, we're the South. John, you're from
Georgia.
Served in the South. Do you know what this is like? I always thought Texas is not the South. That's my home, but Texas is not the South. Texas is Texas. So people here are, they are a little, there's some steel magnolias around. They're giant, gentler and kinder in many ways, at least to your face. But,
bless your heart.
Yeah, bless your heart. But I've experienced that people here are genuinely kind. They really do have kind hearts. And maybe that is being Southern, maybe that's cultural. But, and I'm also, being a Hispanic female, in our house, talking loud, screaming and yelling and arguing and all of that, and then hugging each other and saying, gee, I love you. That's how we work. That's how we roll. And I'll never forget my husband, the first Thanksgiving he came home with me. And he was like, how do you people do this? And I said, what do you mean? How do you people do this? And he said, just argued and, you disagreed and all that. And then you went around like, oh, yeah, okay, everybody's happy and hugging and kissing. And I'm like,
this is so great. My wife is going to watch this. And this is going to answer so many questions for her. We're Hispanic. My family, and I never knew it.
John Estevens.
I never knew it.
I'm sure other families that are not Hispanic do that, but culturally, it is the way that people live, and it's okay. You don't have to agree with everything that I say in order to love me. And I hope that that's reciprocal. So I don't even know, where did we start that?
We just wander all over the place.
Okay.
Who knows where we end up is where we end up. It's just a journey. Yeah. It's a serendipitous journey.
I was interested in something you had said earlier. We had talked to Todd Bolsinger a few weeks ago about resilience, and one of the things that he talked about there is something you had mentioned in terms of like the future seems to be quite uncharted. We don't know what's unfolding, what's going to happen on multiple domains, and so that like the spiritual practices and our our exercise, those kinds of things are these rhythms almost of life. This is the praying of the hours, in a sense that give us then that structure to face those days differently. And and it sounds like those are things that you really are talking about as well, those kind of structures that a family and faith and some of those spiritual dynamics, so that we don't know what's going to unfold, but we can be open to the God that leads us into that unfolding.
Yeah, I mean, I've shared this in other places, but one of my spiritual practices is every morning, whether I come into the home office or the office downtown, my prayer is borrowed from 2 Timothy. Give me a spirit, come Holy Spirit, come. Give me a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and sound mind. And oh, by the way, I think I might need a little extra patience today and perseverance. And there are things that I don't even know that I need to stay, but you do. So come, Holy Spirit, come. I mean, that is, and I light a candle. That is every morning of my life. And it really has given me, it is a spiritual practice in many ways, but it's also, it centers me for the day, that no matter what's going to come at me, I'm convinced that the Spirit is here, that I'm going to be surprised by the movement of the Spirit probably, at every turn this day, and that I'm not sure I know what I need today. But I am convinced that God knows what I need. And I think that that's also maybe that is resilience, that's persistence of being somewhat nimble in what we do, being purposeful in what we do. I mean, I'm very purposeful, maybe to a fault, on what I do. I make lists. This is what I'm going to get accomplished today. And so to know that even though I'm very purposeful and I have my list, that isn't always the way it's going to go. And yet the Spirit is still present no matter what direction we go. So it is just a sense of confidence and just rest in the knowledge that the Spirit is with me. And often I pick a hymn for a season. The Hymn of Promise has been my Lenten hymn. When it holds a mystery, unrevealed until it's seasoned, something God alone can see. That I can't see yet what God sees, but my prayer, it's like, can I have superpower vision to see what you see? That knowing that somewhere buried in this mess of stuff, that there are flowers, there's a bulb somewhere in here that will bear fruit at some point. And so surprise me today. Show me where the fruit is. Give me those eyes to see what I can't see.
That's really hard these days. This morning in our staff devotional and formation time, I was sharing something that I'd gotten this morning, every morning, from Richard Rohr in his center. And it was about how the prophets always had this positive sense of how the divine was at work in the world, even though they were battling against some very powerful negative things. So he uses Amos, for example, of how God speaks into justice and poverty and sort of the inequities. And yet Amos, never was cynical or defeatist so even though the prophets speaking out the truth into the world, it always maintains a sense of positivity. I think that's really hard for pastors and prophets and teachers and priests in the days we live. And I don't care what denomination you're in. I mean, I think it's just really hard. It's harder now. I've said, I thought it was just because I moved to Houston, but I think it's more than that. I think ministry to me is exponentially more difficult in the last, I would say, 7 years, 5 to 7, 10 years than the first 20 years I was involved in it. And I'm not saying it was always easy, but I don't know about you, how you feel, but it's something has changed. And I don't know if it's just the culture or the attitudes or maybe just the seasons. I don't know exactly what causes it, but it does feel like it's more difficult. There's a valley we're pushing through. Sometimes it's hard to stay positive.
It is. I mean, and I do think it's our culture wars, all of the influences that we have around us. I mean, starting ministry without an internet, and without a Google, to today where everybody's an expert, right? Because they have access to all of this information. And I think we've lost, as good as all of that is, we have lost the ability to connect with human beings at the very core. And we see people not as people. I don't even know how to communicate that, but there are times that we don't see the person. We don't see deeply into a person's life. Just think about how we're talking here. And I mean, I know you're real because I know the two of you, but you're not a hologram. Yeah. And I think sometimes our actions are as if people are not real, therefore they have no feelings, no soul, or whatever it is. And I just think that's lost on us. And I love. I have some friends from that are not necessarily churched people. They've been friends either through Dean's work or my previous life in the corporate world. And I love hanging out with them because they don't really give a flying flip what I do for a living. They love me. Yeah. They love me and think that sometimes my work is just the craziest thing in the whole wide world. Like, what do you mean you can't do that? But the fact is that our relationships are based on so much more than my identity as pastor, as bishop. They really are my identity in being friend Cynthia, Dean's wife, or Dean's spouse, Elizabeth's mother. I miss so much of that in this role because you have this identity, and there are times I just want to be Cynthia, but I also know that with this role comes great responsibility as pastor, preacher, prophet. So.
What was it, Todd? Was it Todd Bolsinger that was telling us about the three relationships, the mentors? Everyone should have mentors, and you should have partners, and you should have friends. And your mentors are the ones that
in every season of your life.
In every season of your life, you should have those three around you. And the mentors are the ones that you go to for advice, for sage counsel, for wisdom, and they're pouring into you. Right. And then your partners are the people that you do your work with. They care more about the mission than they care. I mean, for them, the mission, both are important, mission and the person, but the mission is really more important. And a friend cares way less about the mission, but way more about you. They don't really care about the mission. They care about you. And I think sometimes I've found in ministry that you'll have the mentors if you seek them out. You got plenty of partners. It's hard to have the friends that care more about you as a person and a human being, and they don't care about the church. And that sounds horrible when you say it that way. It doesn't mean they don't care. It's just like, that's not their number one priority is, how are you doing?
That's right.
How are you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I have that, those people, and I have them for different reasons, if that makes sense. So I have mentors for almost like different topics, and like, okay, so today I need somebody that's just going to call me on this stuff, and I know who that person is. If I need to call somebody that's going to make me feel good, I know who that is. And they're not always, they're different people. Yeah. And accountability is really important. But, I have, and that's really my friend that will just call me on it, just plain, say it plain. And the others are much more guarded. But I have different people I call for different things. I do that professionally too. I mean, for the not just the mentor stuff, but some technical things. So I know when to call Janice Huey. I know when to call Greg Jones. There are people that are on my list depending on what it is that I need. And that's super important because not everybody can do everything that Bishop Janice Riggle Huey is a superpower woman, but and she can do a lot of things, but she can't do everything. And so I really have different people that I call for different reasons at different times.
And I think when you get in a role as a pastor, particularly in a larger church, but especially at Bishop, people see you in a role. You're less defined as an individual person.
Right.
I mean, even the bishops I've had relationships with, they're way more about the office or the role that they occupy than, there's kind of like, there's this kind of wall there.
There's a barrier.
Yeah, there's like,
there is.
Whether it's from you or from them or from just the nature of the relationship. Yeah. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think the same thing true when you're a pastor of a larger church. People identify you based on the role.
Yeah.
And they know you only through the sermon or through the declaration. They don't know you like we're having this conversation now with you, sharing things in your life. I bet the vast majority of the people that send you these letters, they don't know any of this stuff about you as a person, as a human being. Yeah. So I think that's a struggle.
When I served at Memorial Drive, one of the gifts that I had in serving there is that I did have at the time, a child in school. And so I had different connections with people. So like you, the line is very thin between church and Friday night football game at Tully Stadium. So I always felt like I ought to pass the offering plate at Tully Stadium, right? But people knew me outside of the church, so they didn't just know me as Reverend Harvey. They knew me as Cynthia Harvey, or actually mostly Elizabeth Harvey's mother. And that actually was also quite good because my persona, I didn't have to be something that was different. I actually had one of her friends would call me, if she came over to the house, she'd call me Mrs. Harvey. If she saw me at church, she'd call me Reverend Harvey. I mean, she made, this is, a 5-year-old, that would make that distinction. So, I really appreciated that I had that opportunity to just be a mom, a wife, in those settings so that people just didn't see me in a pulpit with a preacher voice, that they knew me in a different setting. I'll tell you the other thing that surprises people all the time is that I have a preaching coach. And our pastors get kind of surprised. I think they were initially surprised when I said, I have a preaching coach. Like bishops don't need preaching coaches, I guess. I don't know. And Alice McKenzie has been a go-to person for me for years and still is. Before I preach an Episcopal address, I run it through 4 or 5 people that'll read for me to say, can you hear my voice? Does this make sense? Does this connect?
Wow.
So I don't just show up and do this. I actually have readers that will give me feedback, and I really want the feedback. So I think that's always kind of surprised people. Like, what do you mean you have people who read your stuff before it's out there? And I don't know.
Well, she's just helped me figure out my problem. I don't have a preaching coach.
You don't have a preaching? Do you have readers? Do you have people that'll do
readers?
That
do you have time to read for me every week, Matt?
I would.
I mean, if you don't finish your sermon until Saturday night at midnight, I mean, I'm not really sure.
on the way to the church.
What I really love is I have pastors that read just they're constant readers, and they'll send me, oh, you ought to read, this book and that person, and I'm like, okay, I don't have time, so why don't you read the book?
Give me a summary.
Give me a little summary of
The
it.
Cliff Notes.
Or bishops. Thank God that there are bishops who can write. I'm not one of those. And when I first came into this office, and Cokesbury sends you books, and a lot of them were like my colleagues. And I remember calling a colleague saying, I don't have time to read these books. I can't imagine writing right now.
Well, last week we had Adam Hamilton with us, and I just jokingly was like, what are you doing today at your lake house, writing another book? I mean, he's only written like 5,000. I can't imagine pastoring a church like Chapelwood. I mean, I'd have to take a sabbatical to write a book.
Adam doesn't sleep, though.
Well, that's true.
He doesn't sleep. So
yeah, he's funny. One time I was texting him. I said, well, hey, I need to talk to you about something or whatever. This is a while back. And he goes, yeah. He goes, well, can you talk tonight like at 11 p.m.? I was like, dude, I'm going to be in bed at 11. I'm calling you at 11. There's no way. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just grateful that there are people who can write books. And I just have the feeling that if I wrote something, who would want to read anything that I wrote? I don't have that sense that I have anything to say. Maybe someday, but not yet. But I'm glad that there are people who can do that.
There was an old preacher in South Georgia. His name was Ray Powell, and when he died, he was considered like one of the best preachers in South Georgia back in the day. And when he died, his wife, he was on his deathbed, and his wife said, Ray, when you die, I'm going to take all your sermons, I'm going to put them in a book, I'm going to publish this book to remember you. He goes, don't you dare. He said, I've stolen every one of those sermons from somewhere. He said it'd be a book full of plagiarism. But, hey, talk to me about, let's shift gears a little bit. I mean, as you think about the churches that you are over and you give leadership to, as we're starting to exit out of pandemic slowly and coming out, one of the things a lot of people have talked about, well, the church was already in a state of decline. There was already struggle coming into this. This is exacerbated and sort of ratcheted up, people being disconnected. How are the churches that you're in your conference thinking in terms of what does ministry look like on the other side of the pandemic? Is it just returning back to normal as quickly as possible, or are there new ways of beginning to think about how we live into the future?
We've got to think of new ways to live into the future. First of all, what we were doing wasn't normal. I just remind people that all the time. I don't know what about that we thought was normal, but it really wasn't normal. And it's having to just really rethink. I don't know about you, but, church people aren't returning to church at, 100% capacity again. Yeah. And so what does it really mean in our future to be the church? We've got buildings that we don't fill anymore. We've got a lot of investment in real estate. So what are we going to do with all those Sunday school rooms you can't fill on a Sunday, or all the pews you don't fill? So I've talked to our congregational development people and transformation people about reimagining again what does it mean to be the church today? As an example, we had a church that was to launch about a year ago this month in March. It was to launch that Sunday that we shut everything down. Wow. That was their launch Sunday. Wow. And they've never launched a brick and mortar church. And they have really been experimenting with launching a virtual church. And so talk about reimagining this. Yeah. I mean, they've got people joining their small groups, their house churches from all over the world in this mid-city church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But they never relaunch. They may someday soon, because they need a sense of place. But, I think they've really rethought about what kind of church will they launch now, given what we've learned from the pandemic and what we've learned from online worship and connecting with our people online. We have a Black church in Alexandria, Louisiana, and the name of the church, and I'll just name it here, Newman, United Methodist Church in Alexandria. Mm-hmm. And when they went to all virtual church, there was a couple in like Portland, I think, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and their church was Newman United Methodist Church. And so on a Sunday morning, they Googled Newman United Methodist Church because they knew that their Newman was having virtual church. And they clicked and they got into Tiffany Postel's church at Newman United Methodist Church in Alexandria, Louisiana. So I don't even know if this couple is still worshiping with them, but for a good part of the pandemic, this really wonderful white couple worshiped at Newman United Methodist Church in Alexandria because they enjoyed the worship with the pastor was dynamic and a great preacher. I mean, so those are the connections, I think. Like, what do we do with that now? Right. So maybe that couple's back at their Newman United Methodist Church, and obviously Tiffany's still doing worship at Newman in Alexandria. I think they're still virtual. But so what do you do with that connection that you made? And what did we learn from these things? You know, if we didn't learn something from these experiences, that's why I say returning back to normal ought not be, we can't go back there. That would just be, you know, first of all, that wouldn't be productive. It'd be kind of silly for us to do that. But what have we learned that we can now leverage, leverage what we're learning? I use that all the time. Leverage what you're learning to take the next faithful step. And what is that at Newman? What is that at Chapelwood? Yeah. What is that for the Louisiana Annual Conference? We're not doing transformation the way we were doing transformation work before. So what does it look like for us in the future? Yeah. And, I think this is a chance to recreate. The whole world's adapted, right? So why wouldn't the church adapt to something new? How many people are really going to go back like they used? They might go back inside a grocery store to shop, but most of us have learned how to get groceries a different way. And I don't know that we'll ever return to go to a grocery store like we did before the pandemic, or online shopping, or all those things that we did. I just can't imagine that we wouldn't leverage what we've learned to do something really, really different. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, admittedly, this church that launched virtually, I've had to have a lot of convincing that this is, because that's not in my mind how you should do it, how we've done it. So I've had to really, really open my mind to will there ever be will there ever be like a real church with a GCFA number, because that's the institutional me, right? And at the same time, I'm pretty excited about some of the experimentation that's gone on.
Well, one of our campuses, of course, we say like everyone else, on that week of March 15th, we stopped having in-person. Of course, at Chapelwood, we've had in-person since September, but one of our campuses, the Upper Room in the Heights, has not returned back, and they may not for a while. Their congregation's not ready, so everything has been on virtual. And we've seen more engagement from people all over the country as well. Yeah. I actually was sharing a couple of letters that I got, and one was a lady in Georgia, another guy was a different city in Texas, and they watch every week and they engage. And so we've had to think in terms of external connections with people. How do we not just have them observe, but engage? Yeah. And so that the walls of the church are no longer just the neighborhood you're in, it's the city you're in, but it's the state and it's around the world. It's crazy.
And
it really is.
And there's a real community that happens in some of these places online. I was thinking about the Friday Bible study that I do.
Oh, the one you do, the Hitchhiker.
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
There's folks from 2 different countries and 12 different states that show up every Friday. And it's like we started a couple weeks to talk about like wrapping things up. And folks are like, what? Like, no, we're not we're not wrapping things up, and so I said, well, it's worth a discussion. Do we want to continue this on? How does this go on? But there's a sense in which we've really created community in a deeply unexpected way, and it's become quite central to people. And so it's not as if we can wrap things up and kind of go, it's become an essential part of people's lives. So trying to figure out then what does that mean going forward?
Right.
How do we do that? So it's uncharted waters.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is people there was a couple of churches I keep track of some people, and they're like, okay, we're ready now to engage in a strategic planning process for the future. We're ready to engage in so we're doing the questionnaires and we're doing this, and it's like the old strategic planning. And I'm sitting here and goes like, anybody who thinks they can engage in some sort of concrete strategic vision planning, it's got to be around values. I think you can be value based as far as the kind of church that you want to be, but the world is changing at a pace that we cannot keep up with.
Right.
And so then there's just living into it as it's going, to be faithful to the values, faithful to the calling, as it's almost like you're riding a wave. You don't control it.
Well, that's why clarity of mission is so important.
Yeah.
Clarity of purpose. I've got these 3 things written down, and Matt, a good friend of ours, you will recognize the language. Clarity of mission, flexible in strategy, and what does it mean to have a resilient organization? That's attributed to Bishop Janice Riggle Huey. Those are and I keep it on a card right here on my desk. Clarity of mission, flexible in strategy, and what does it mean to be a resilient organization? I think that's what we need to be about, because I think if you put so much into, if you concretize things, just think about even what we've learned over the last, year, is what you learned last week or what you learned last year is really almost no longer relevant today. You remember that whole conversation about online communion? People made their decisions. Some did it, some didn't, whatever. Right. But we're not talking about that anymore.
No.
Or how are you going to text to give? How are you going to collect your offering? How are you going to register? That's like yesterday's news.
Yeah.
So what is that now for us? I had a New York Times reporter wanting some statement from the Council of Bishops. This was like last fall about online communion. And I literally, I think my quote in the New York Times was like, your question is so yesterday. It's like that, not that we solved it for all times and all forever, but that was like a question March. And then how do we do Easter? And what about ashes? And, all of that kind of stuff. But now we're into different new questions. So what are the new questions that we need to be asking ourselves? Clarity of mission, flexible in strategy, and how do we remain a resilient organization? I think those 3 questions will serve us well as we move into whatever is next, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I like the resilience or some sense of a dynamism that has to exist in real time, because they teach you in systems theory. It's like, okay, you can learn a new opportunity. You learn 2 ways, through imitation of models or trial and error, but you learn something new. And then you think, okay, we learned something new. Now we come through the pandemic, we've learned something. And then immediately what we want to do is we want to settle on that. All right, we want to, like you said, we want to concretize that. That's the new normal. That's the new way of being. And I think what the pandemic is going to teach us, if we're smart, is that even when you learn something new, the next day, the environment has changed again. And the next day it changes again, and the next day it changes again. And like I said before, the world is changing so fast that you almost can't sit anymore in one spot. You can't institutionalize something anymore. I think that's one of the reasons why our denomination is kind of struggling, as I think of it from an organization or a systems perspective, is that we are so institutionalized, we are so concretized, codified, and that so much is changing that whenever we try to adapt, we're so limited by the Constitution and by all these things in the church that we can't. And I really think that while the human sexuality issue is the primary sort of dividing thing, I do think that one of the things of people who like are ready to be done with the United Methodist Church, for some of it for them is like, they do see the limitations of, oh, sorry, Siri. They do see some of the limitations of kind of how an institution gets locked in, and then it has its own identity. It feeds itself. It's like you can't control it anymore.
Yeah. Well, do you remember in the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all trying to figure out what to do, and the CDC would issue something, and then a few days later they'd change it. And you heard people come like, what are they changing their mind again? Can they not make up their mind what we need to do? Wear a mask, not wear a mask, 6 feet, 3 feet, what is it? Mm-hmm. And what I learned, and I get that Johns Hopkins review every day, is that scientists learn something, they research, they learn something new, and then they make a decision. They continue the research. They don't stop the research. They continue the research. They learn something new that actually implicates or can modifies their previous decision, and then they make a different decision.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So imagine if we did that as a church. Is like, okay, I learned this today, and this is my learning. And so what that means is what I did yesterday really doesn't work now. And now I need to do something different. And it's not that I changed my mind. It's not that I don't know what I'm doing. It's none of that. It's that I can take what I've learned, and what I'm calling it science here, and adapt it for my next decision. Yeah. And so, and that's, I think, John, the hard part right now, I would just say, given where we are as a church, is the book of discipline was never written with a pandemic in mind. It was written reflecting the U.S. system governance structure. Mm-hmm. It's written that looks just like that. It mirrors that. And that's not necessarily how the church works at its best. Yeah. And so we've got, people say, well, we should just do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, you can, but, paragraph, blah, 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 says this. And I as a non-institutional kind of person, I hate that. But it is, that's the lane that we have to work in, because otherwise you're going to find yourself in really big trouble. But, I look for all the possibilities. I try to turn every rock of, can we do it this way? Can we do it differently? How far can I push this? But we've got a structure in the United Methodist Church that doesn't allow for flexible strategy and for an organization to really be resilient. I mean, that's what gets us stuck so often. And it is, it's the part of what I do today that is, I realize that without structure, it's chaos. I get that. So I know you have to have a certain level of structure, but some days I feel like, our hands are bound by some archaic ways of dealing with this, and we get stuck.
Well, this is not new. The church has been codified, institutionalized, concretized for 2,000 years. And, there's certain ways that there's renewal that happens. And, sometimes we've found that since, 1000 AD, it's been through splits and schisms and separations, which I would love to see the church start. Well, the United Methodist Church was born out of a union of churches, which is very unique, not in our history. You segued for us, and I think that, while a lot of people who listen to our podcast probably don't know all the ins and outs of the United Methodist Church, there are other people that would be bitterly disappointed if I didn't ask you about stuff in the United Methodist Church. So if you were going to give the New York
stuff in the United Methodist Church.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to keep it G-rated. I don't want I don't want the E next to our podcast. You know what it is, an E for explicit language. But let's just say the New York Times reporter calls you and you have to give like the 2-minute sort of explanation of where we find ourselves as United Methodist Church and what we're facing for, even for people that may not be so steeped in our denomination. How do you tell people kind of where we are and what we're facing as a denomination?
I think we're deeply divided as a denomination, and I don't think we're just deeply divided over homosexuality. I think there are other things that divide us. Unfortunately, we still live in a terrible history of racism, and it's not history; it's today. And, I live just a few miles away from the birthplace of the KKK, so racism runs rampant here. So I think that there are many things that divide us as a church. Then, and maybe this is naive, this is Pollyanna. I haven't given up on the fact that we can, in fact, be a big tent church. We've been there before.
Yeah.
And, how many churches does every United Methodist church have a United Methodist men and all those things that are required in the discipline? No, they don't, because it may not be practical where you are. I wish, but there are some things that have evolved over time that have made those changes. So I think sometimes, and I'm going to take a risk here.
Go ahead. We got you back.
Some of the things that divide us I'm not sure they're really what divides us. Yeah. I don't think that what we say divides us is really what divides us. And so I really wonder whether we need to look deeply at our spiritual practices, who we say that we are. And if you say that you are a child of God made in the image of God, can you actually say that that's not true for somebody else? I just don't understand that, frankly. And so I think sometimes we use code words that might fit for some folk. But really at the very depth of this, I wonder how much this is a spiritual issue, not an issue. And I think that could be probably argued in both ways for people. But I wonder how much of what divides us is really what divides us. I know that probably doesn't make any sense, but and I think today we were talking about Imagine No Malaria campaign and some of the things that have united us as a church, and that's so much more powerful than anything else. I live in South Louisiana, where we've been the beneficiaries of so much support after all of these hurricanes and disasters. Those are the things, that's when we're at our best. That's when the connection is at its very best. And so I'm just not sold on it. I signed the protocol for separation. And remember, that was negotiated. But I think somewhere deep in my soul, I still long for a church that is open to all. And I think that's what makes us better. That's what, in my opinion, that's why I came to the United Methodist Church, because there was a place for me. And I just really think that sometimes we might be fooling ourselves. Yeah. And what we name as the dividers versus what unites us. And as I said, and I also realize that for some people, they can't stay in a church that will anywhere ever perform a same gender wedding or ordain an LGBTQ person. I get that. So let's find a place where you can be you, I can be me, and I can do me, and that is a place where your soul is fed. It's got to be torturous for people to be someplace where they don't want to be. And so how do what do you do about that? And how do we give space, and in a way that we don't agree on some things, yet there is a place and a space of grace where people can be what they believe God has called them to be. And who God has called me to be might be very different than what God has called John Stevens or Matt Russell to be. And that's okay. That's okay. We're still siblings, whether we like it or not. We are. And I lament that we are at the place where we are. I really do. And I guess I'm just maybe hopeful or faithful enough to believe that somewhere, as I said, my hymn of promise, that somewhere there is a bulb somewhere in here, buried deep into the dirt, that will bear that Japanese magnolia or that azalea, and that's you or me.
Unless that seed falls into the ground and dies, it cannot bear much fruit. I think that was from Jesus.
I think
pretty smart dude.
Pretty smart dude.
You and I have some similarities in the sense that it's been made it very well known that I'm a big fan of unity. I'm a big fan of keeping the body of Christ together. I think like there's a group that came up with this Christmas covenant, and when you see the language that they use from the African culture, from the Filipino culture, this sense of community, even though they're not all in the same page together, that this is something that God has wired into the creation. And so when Jesus says, I pray that they will be one as I and the Father are one, and that's the model for them to love one another. And so I've always been a fan of unity, even though much like you signed your name on a protocol for separation. I participated with a group in Indianapolis, sort of the predecessor to that. Not because I wanted the church to split, but because we were in an impasse, just like you experienced. And we're not productive. We're not able. But I really do think if there was some way that we could find a way to remain together, have enough separation and enough respect, and to honor that everyone's not on the same page. I really believe that that the center is very broad. Yeah. And one of the things that I have not appreciated by my brothers and sisters who, on one side of the argument, is they have co-opted certain words and redefined them, like orthodox. I'm orthodox.
I claim to be myself.
Evangelical. I'm evangelical. Traditionalist. I'm traditionalist, but I'm a compatibilist. And so I have, and I remember one person wrote one time, there is no such thing as a traditionalist compatibilist. Well, then that means I don't exist. You're talking to a unicorn, and what I can tell you in the relationships with a lot of Methodists across the Southeast that I am friends with, that I know, there are a lot of traditional compatibilists. There are a lot of traditionalists who don't want to see the church break apart. But like you said, they want to have a sense of mutual respect and honor on local church decisions. And they do believe that the church is stronger together than it is separated. What do you see in your crystal ball? What's your vision? I mean, you're the president of the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church, so we all await to hear. Now, you don't know what's going to happen, but what would be your hoped for vision and dream? You shared a little bit of that already, but I mean, if you could do it, what would it look like?
If I could start it over,
right.
mulligan here. What I hope and what is real, it may be pretty far apart at this point. But what does the remaining, I hate the post-separation UMC look like? I hate that language. Hate's probably a strong word, but I dislike that language. But I want to be in a church where literally it is a church for all God's children. Let me just describe this church for you because I've been in it. There's a church in New Orleans. It's one of the closest churches we have to the French Quarter. It's St. Mark's. And when you go to St. Mark's, if you get there early enough, there's still people sleeping on the sidewalk as you make your way to the church. Especially in the winter, it's a great place to be because it's warm inside the church for worship. You get inside for worship. We have a couple of these, like this church, particularly in New Orleans, and you are sitting in a church with a professor from Dillard University. You're sitting with a physician from, Ochsner's or Tulane or whatever, and you're sitting there. They're sitting next to the homeless person that you just had to walk around because they were sleeping on the sidewalk. Church, you give the benediction, and there are people in the kitchen preparing a meal. Back when we could do that, now it's like box lunches, and they bring them out to those homeless people, and they eat in the pews because there is no fellowship hall or anything like that in this church. And the first time I went there, I stepped up to preach, and I looked out, and it's the only time I've had to turn around and get myself back together. Because I looked out and I thought, oh my gosh, black, white, gay, straight, rich, poor, poor beyond poor, every kind of human that I knew was sitting in this little church. And I had to turn around and get myself together. I mean, I was about to burst into, like tears of that I would not have been able to get myself back on track. And to me, that was a vision of what the church ought to be. And when we served lunch, it was communion. I don't care what it was sacramental in that moment. Might not have been the sacrament, but it was sacramental in that moment. That's a church that I want to be a part of. And I believe that the United Methodist Church has the makings of everything it needs for a church such as that. That's the foundation of who we are as United Methodists, as Methodists. When we talk about reaching to the poor, education, mission, healthcare, those are the foundational parts of what it means to be a Wesleyan Methodist. And I am just maybe naive, faithful, crazy enough to believe that that's still a church, that can still be the church for us. And so I describe that church because for me, it's got a name because I've been there. And it's a little church. It's not huge. And it's what the church, it's the kingdom right there in front of me. I could see it. I could smell it. I could touch it. Yeah. It was right in front of me. And I just long for that. I long for a church. It
reminds me in the Gospel of Matthew, it talks about when Jesus looked out on the crowds, he had compassion on them. It was the same thing. He looked out on all these people who had gathered around, and he was moved with compassion for them, moved in the bowels, moved in his spirit to feed them and heal them. And, that's to have that connection with the community, I think is powerful.
It was for me, it's among my most powerful moments I've had in my now going on 9 years in Louisiana in the quadrennium. The dog, I always call this the groundhog quadrennium. It's the one that never ends. But I would put that as a highlight of my 9 years here, of being able to be in that church on that day.
That's so good.
And to hand somebody a pair of socks and a sandwich. Man, that's Jesus-like stuff. That's Jesus-like.
Yeah, that's like when we go out to the food pantry here at Fairhaven, on the campus at Fairhaven. We're getting close to 3 million pounds of food has been distributed to hundreds of thousands. Gosh, we're close to 600,000 people, 700,000 people.
We're over 500,000.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and that's what a church like Chapelwood's able to do, because you have this sense of unity and you can work together in the community. All right, well, I want to be faithful to your time and everything, but I would be remiss, because there's probably some metho nerds that exist out there that know enough about stuff. So if you're not a metho nerd, you can just check out now. But so we were supposed to have a general conference in 2020. Mm-hmm. We had this little thing called a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So it got moved to 2021. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic decided it was not done with us. So now it's moved to 2022. And the bishop said, we're going to have a special one-day general conference on May 8th. Mm-hmm. And, some people were happy and some people were not, to vote for these the way I understood it in layman's terms, some sort of perfunctory, sort of administrative, tidy up type resolutions just to keep us going for the next 2 years, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think it was yesterday or the day before or whatever, we found out, okay, well, now y'all have canceled May 8th. So tell people who are paying attention to this, make some news. What happened?
What happened?
What happened?
I'll just say, I'll say what I can.
Say what you can. Don't say what you can't.
The timeline that we were pushing up against was pretty aggressive, and it has been all along, and perhaps much more aggressive than most Methodists are used to moving. And I think that there's still a lot of unanswered questions. There's some confusion about what the May 8th special session was going to be. We've got to have more conversations in order to clear up some of the confusion. Can you elect bishops before a general conference? Can you retire bishops? All of those questions that I think there's still some unanswered questions for people. And the confusion was great enough that it caused us to stop where we were and really examine and answer the questions. When you realize people are asking you some really basic questions, I realize anyway that we weren't communicating as well as we should have. And so that is why we've got to have a lot more conversations with people, bringing people along to understand the why of the special session. And it was confusing. People didn't understand that the special session was to have a quorum in order to suspend the rules, in order to be able to take a mail-in ballot. That was the reason for the special session. The special session was not, and the mail-in ballot would contain those 12 administrative items. But the special session itself was to gain a quorum so that we could gain a quorum, suspend the rules by 2/3, so that we could have a mail-in ballot, so that the majority of the connection, it was determined by a task force that would be believe it or not, a technology task force
paper
made the
ballot
recommendation to do a paper ballot, because it would be the way to include the most people was a justice issue, the most people across the connection.
Yeah, because some people may not understand. It's not just United Methodists in the United States. I mean, you have millions and millions, 5-6 million Methodists around the world, in Africa, Philippines, Eurasia, Europe.
Right.
And so you don't have the same levels of technology and interaction everywhere.
No. And, although sometimes I wonder about my own technology sitting here in my office, and sometimes I don't have stable internet. But so it was really the most just way to do this. And I think we got confused. And so when there's this much misunderstanding, confusion, and some people got it. Some people clearly got it. It said to us, we haven't answered all the questions. We haven't communicated this properly. And so that's the why. And a lot of conversation. We spent 4 hours in a council meeting yesterday with just this matter. And this was a decision that we made. Now, with it comes some we've got some consequences now to deal with. So the general conference is not until August of 2022, and the jurisdictional conference will follow that. The jurisdictional conference has to be set by the Council of Bishops. The date for the the regular jurisdictional conference has to be the same in all 5 jurisdictions in the United States. So, and the bishops set that, and that will be before us here soon. So that means that we're where we are as of yesterday. We are where we were, and will remain where we are until after the general conference in August.
So these conversations about jurisdictions having jurisdictional conferences, calling them, invoking them this summer of 21, is that like even something that can be done, or no one even knows that yet?
Well, you can't have a regular jurisdictional conference until there is a general conference. You can have a special jurisdictional conference, but you cannot elect bishops, nor can you retire bishops
Okay.
at a special session, unless at a special session, and certainly not until there's a general conference. So you could meet, but you could have a memorial service honoring the bishops.
Sure. But there was sort of a movement afoot by some things that have been put out about jurisdictions calling a conference this summer, 21, electing bishops, retiring bishops. I think you've seen some of that maybe, but I didn't know if that was something that you could even do or not do.
You cannot do that.
Yeah. Okay.
That just happened.
She just said it.
It can't happen. What?
No. That's definitive, So when all
he just said that just happened. She just said that.
It can't happen. I mean, and we'll turn over every rock, continue to try to find maybe a missing rock that
Sure.
we haven't seen yet, but it is not possible. And,
so what do you do if we don't have a general conference? Let's say we delay it again for another 2 years till 24, and then look at her face.
Maybe we can do it to 36,
and then all of the bishops have retired. Right. We just become a Baptist then at that point, I guess. I don't know. I'm kidding. Joking.
But here is the way a bishop can retire. Just for the metho nerds that need to know. A bishop, how pastors can retire ad interim. So if you decided, John, you were going to retire, you could retire the day after, you could retire now, and it would not, you don't have to wait till annual conference to retire.
Oh, wow. That's good to know. I might have. Thank you so much.
Now, the clergy session, obviously, has to vote on your retirement, but you can retire anytime. Bishops cannot. The only time bishops can retire is at a regular jurisdictional conference. So the only 2 ways that you can retire, not at a jurisdictional conference, you can retire vocationally. So that means you can go to another job, another gig, or medically, you can retire for medical reasons. It's the only 2 reasons, and those are good, legitimate reasons. And we've got 2 examples right now. Bishop Bruce O., who was the Dakotas and Minnesota bishop, he retired vocationally and is the executive secretary of the Council of Bishops. Sally Dick was the bishop in Northern Illinois. She actually retired early. She retired vocationally, and she is the ecumenical officer for the council. But you don't even have to have that big of, you could be the bishop in residence at Chapelwood United Methodist Church. And you can do that. So the discipline.
So you're looking for a job.
Yeah. Hey, you want a soft landing? Come on back home.
Yeah. Right down the road.
But there are, so those are the only 2 ways. Otherwise, you have to wait till a jurisdictional conference.
We need you where you're at. We don't want you coming home yet.
No.
We need you.
Well, listen, we're praying for you, and I hope that everyone else is praying for you. Even folks that may not agree with you all the time. I hope they keep you in their prayers. And
I hope so too.
We are, no one drew this up. We didn't see any of this coming. And, I think God puts you in the place for such a time as this. I believe that about myself. as far as there's a lot of days I can tell you, I wonder, man, we selling insurance or used cars or something, because it's tough, and I can't even begin to imagine in your role with all the other added stuff on top of that, because it's not just one congregation, it's all the congregations and all the bishops from around the world. So thank you so much for your time, and just know we love you and we're praying for you.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
And be safe and well, and eat some lobster ravioli.
No, tonight I think it's green chicken enchiladas, and then I make the rice, because I make my mother's rice, and it's
Arroz
like,
verde?
No. But
Amarillo.
It's the best, amarillo. It's the best rice you'll ever eat. I promise you.
Are you an egg on top with your green enchiladas or no egg?
No egg.
All right.
Wow.
No. So they're in, I started them before I left. So
that's great.
Well,
it'll be good.
Bless you, and when you're over this way, let us know.
Thank you so
You bet.
much.
Thank y'all. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
God bless. God's calls people to these things. You need them.
And she's good. She's able to spiritually hold herself, and
I can just tell you, based on just knowing social media and knowing people that are out there and knowing the different camps, man, there are people that, just don't like her.
Yeah.
And they're on sometimes different ends of the spectrum. I mean, you can't win in a position like that.
And you may have been called a scallywag or whatever it was this week. Charlatan. But I have never thought about sending you a rock in the mail, but I may do that just for...
I thought that I actually thought that was pretty creative. It's like, upon this rock, I build my church.
Oh.
I would have used it as a paperweight.
I was going to say, I would have kept that and just said, must be doing something right.
What do you think is going through someone's head that they put a rock in an envelope and mail it to you?
To a bishop.
Does that have is that like a mafia thing?
I don't know.
Now, see, I've heard of people like taking a rock.
You're a person.
Oh, you're going to look it up, a charlatan?
It says no, go back to the definition, because it says a person practicing quackery. Or other some
quackery. Or some similar confidence
trick or deception
in order to obtain money, fame or other. Well, there you go. So I'm not getting the money, the fame, or the other advantage. So I'm not really
shyster,
sure.
quack, or faker are the
a shyster.
Shyster, quack, or faker.
Interesting. Huh. A rock. So you let someone know they rock by sending them a rock in the mail. Send this to Cynthia. She rocks.
That's in 2007. You can send that anywhere for $9.99.
9 unusual things you can send through the mail. Send them a rock to let them know they rock.
You are my rock. You're a rock star.
Now, see, I do remember they would take the rocks and they would tie a note around them like,
burn in hell or whatever.
I'm going to kill you and throw it through your window.
Right.
To mail someone, they're memes of the soil.
Listen, that's going back to Footloose. You remember Footloose, the movie? Rock through the window? Yeah. The rock said burn in hell?
Yeah.
So, but this is different. Maybe this is, you're my...
Well, I think we should do some research on, if people are out there, they should let us know what they think.
I wonder if you could just put a couple stamps on a brick on the rock and put your...
I didn't think about that. How much does that cost to send the rock?
I just want to say this. I think it'd be really interesting to see what can you send John Stevens in the mail. This is a new thing we're doing on our podcast. It's a new segment on what did John get in the mail this week. And we're going to try to see what we can send John Stevens.
If it's wine, send away.
Yeah, well, I'm saying send him wine, but also, can you send a brick with a couple stamps on it?
A coconut.
You'll never know. A coconut to John Stevens.
Oh, you don't even have to wrap a coconut. No. It's considered a self-contained. Yeah. All you got to do is put a stamp on it and an address.
And
that
your address.
Is amazing.
And John.
You know what? We're going to send her a coconut.
I think a potato. I think we need to send John.
All right, we need to be done. This is just, it's getting too bad.
Hey, I think in our new segment, what did
Off
John
the rails
get,
with John?
What did John get in the mail?
Well, I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.